Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Vegas Pulse Stories from the Back of the House. My first guest was Doug Jablin. Well, he's back. Doug is a journalist, a documentary maker, a filmmaker, and so much more. He's doing a documentary about Vegas entertainment from, what is it, Doug,
1964
1964 to
2002,
2002. Why 2002?
because that was the time period where Vegas shifted into what we like to
Okay.
consider the modern era.
It's not the day the music died, right?
No, not
that's
at all.
just it went to the modern era. Well, I think it shifted even after 2002.
Oh yeah, it continued,
There was another shift in the 20 teens.
but that was a big shift during that period of time
Yeah.
that continued on.
We're going to do something different this week. He's going to ask me questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Doug here in just a second about those days where everybody wants to hear the stories. Now, let me add a caveat to this. Some of the stories could be slightly exaggerated, so we'll just leave it at that. Doug, what do you got for me today? We have not rehearsed.
No,
You have not told me the questions,
no.
so I'm ready to go. What do you got?
So you are living history, Ron. You are fascinating because you were there in the 70s, and most people are gone or they've forgotten it. But you've got a great memory, and you can tell the stories about that era where Vegas was still the Wild Wild West,
No doubt.
and nightclubs, were still run by the mob. There was prostitution. It was a crazy time.
It was a crazy time, but it was wild and it was open and it was free. Not free financially, free like the First Amendment free, whatever. Even though prostitution was illegal, except out in Nye County and some Story County and some of the other counties, which is a big source of revenue. If you want to talk about Sherry's Ranch, Chuck Lee, who was the homicide detective from the Metro, when he retired, I guess they make a lot of money. He bought Sherry's Ranch. And there's stories about that as well out in Pahrump. But here in Las Vegas, it wasn't enforced. It was part of the allure of the town. They were everywhere, up and down the strip. One sheriff would come in, and he'd get a little stringent, and he would restrict, get off the strip, get off the sidewalk rather, and get in the building.
Well, the 70s
then the
were
hotels
still
didn't want
the
them
era of
inside.
Ralph Lamb.
Ralph Lamb was open. So was his successor. I believe his name was John McIntyre. That's probably wrong, but it started with
Okay.
an M.
I've forgotten.
And he came in, and he was even more liberal than Lamb. Lamb would have done anything if you voted for him or you contributed to his ad campaign. He was always on your side. I think I told you last show, we got badges if we put $500. Maybe I didn't.
No.
We would get a badge, a police badge, official police badge, if we contributed $500 to Ralph Lamb's running for re-election.
Wow.
I'll never forget. I was at one of the bowling alleys, and I think it's long gone. And he was having a fundraiser. I went to it, put up my money, got my badge. And that badge got me into the Muhammad Ali Leon Spinks fight, the one he lost. Lost
So
the
you
championship.
didn't have to pay for tickets.
I didn't have to pay for anything. Once you had that badge, movie theaters, no tickets for any of the shows. It was all on the house. Everything was comped because I supported the sheriff. McIntyre came in with the same thing. We supported the sheriff. He did a marvelous job, except all the complaints was that all the ladies of the evening were crowding the streets, and people were being bothered, tourists who'd walk by and they'd be solicited. So that wasn't good. And that began to happen. So the next sheriff that came in, he cleaned it all up. In came the badges. They recalled the badges. All the girls were kicked off the street corners. The best one was Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard, right there in front of Dre's,
Yeah.
which is now going to be the Cromwell, which is now going to be a Vanderpump Hotel. You're familiar with that.
Sure.
But most of the girls, when they got kicked off the street, you could still find them on Boulder Highway, but, you know, ugh, you know, we don't want to go there. Went to the strip clubs in it was in the 90s. I'm already into the 90s where I was involved with marketing the Olympic Garden Strip Club, which is now the Spearmint Rhinoceros, Spirit Rhino, right on the strip. The strip starts here.
Peppermint
slogan.
Hippo.
That's it, Peppermint Hippo. That's where the Olympic Gardens was. Now, the story there is we got sued. He got sued. His name was, I'll think of it in a minute. I had it a second ago. Iliadis. And he owned Yellow Cab and Checker Cab and also the Olympic Garden. But we had to get the word Olympic out of there because the U.S. Olympic Committee sent a cease and desist. It was called the Olympic Gardens
Yeah.
because it was a restaurant first. And then it became a strip club.
Oh.
But because it was a restaurant, it had a gaming license. No strip clubs have gaming licenses. They don't go together. But this was a restaurant first, so it was grandfathered in.
Yeah, that's the workaround.
Yeah, he used to tell me that he gets all his money back. Pete Iliadis, he gets all his money back. I said, how does that happen, Pete? He said, well, the girls, first of all, there was a $45 tip in. You know what that is?
No.
They paid to be on stage. They bought their stage time.
Oh.
$45 tip in. There was a percentage of what they made that went to the house. They got the rest, which was substantial. They make tips. But they would gamble it away after their shift, or they would drink it away after their shift.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how he got his money back. They never left the building. We got to take a break right now. I hope you enjoyed that story. We'll be back on Vegas Pulse, Stories from the Back of the House with Doug Jablin and me, your host, Ron Garrett. Be right back. Anyway, Doug, back to you or back to me, however you want it. Hit me with another one.
Okay, so let's continue with that idea about the illicit activities of the nightclubs,
Okay.
dealing with prostitution and drugs, and we know that there's the money laundering. That's obvious, but we don't know about the other things involved.
Well, money laundering comes in many forms. Money laundering is mostly if you take something off the top, the skim, you not have to launder it. It's already disappeared. So how they money launder, I don't know the particulars of all that. But as far as the illicit businesses inside all these, they were always there. It's part of the Vegas charm, if you will. Now, some people don't think prostitution is charming. I think they do. And I met a lot of the ladies who did that and they were strippers as well. And they're all nice people, by the way. I mean, they're all nice people. I got one thing I want to tell you, though. 100% of the strippers in a club, always a percentage that are different than the rest. Some of the ladies that would fly in from L.A., San Diego, San Francisco on Air West at the time, it was called the hooker flight that would leave on Friday afternoon and come back Monday morning. And most of them would check out of college and come to Vegas on the hooker flights, and they would then spread out throughout the different various strip clubs here in town. And then on Monday morning, they go home. Those girls were a little bit different because they had money. They were there they came to pay for their tuitions. Some of the ladies showed up in Corvettes. They drive here. They'd come in a Corvette. They'd come in a big black Cadillac. They'd show up with private cars, private planes, because they took the money they made and they didn't blow it on booze, drugs, and gambling, like most of the women that did that profession did. What else you got?
So they kept it clean.
Yeah, they took advantage of making that kind of income, and they made pretty good money, $2,000-3,000 a night sometimes.
So
unless they get a sucker.
they would go into the nightclubs and with permission from nightclubs. They weren't actually
They
under
had
the
permission.
hire of
No, they
nightclubs.
didn't work for the nightclubs.
They
no.
just worked with the nightclubs.
They would get free entry. Women are always invited without any door charge, cover charge, always, and were given free drinks. So most of the clubs in those days, including the ones we talked about, Bogies, Jubilation, the Brewery, the Oz, Billy Jack's, Dirty Sally's, same routine. They would pay for nothing. They wanted them in the hotel, in the bar. A quick story about that.
Okay.
When I was the marketing entertainment director of the Sahara, which was in the 2004 to 2008, I'm on this casino floor. I'm at the bar during the daytime with the the general manager and the president of the hotel. One of the security guards comes over and says to the president of the hotel, Mr. Hummel, his name was Al Hummel. He was a great guy, did a great job. Mr. Hummel, there are some hookers over here at the bar, the other bar. They're obviously soliciting. What do you think I should do? This security guy.
Yeah.
He turned and says, buy him a drink. That was the attitude. Buy him a drink. Show him a good time. Don't chase him away.
Same thing with the drug dealers, that they want the coke sold at the clubs, so that
They really didn't want it sold inside the casinos, but there were
or the nightclubs.
the nightclubs. There was a time where I was at Circus, and again I was the marketing director. And this is not in the 70s. This was in 1993. There was a pit boss that was dealing in the pit during his shift. We always talk about security, the cameras in the eye in the sky and all that. I got a call from security that said, Mr. Garrett, would you come on up? We want to have you take a look at this. And Mr. Bennett, who ran the hotel, he was called into it. He'd have to be there. We went to the security room, and we're watching the boss dealing drugs right there in the pit. You know, and it wasn't even hidden. You know, the hand change. You know,
Yeah.
It wasn't even hidden, and we're watching him for a half hour. So eventually, what do you do? What do you do? Well, you want to make the biggest stink, the biggest noise, the most obvious thing in the world, is to bust him right there on the floor, in the pit, with everybody watching, because you want that message to get to everybody else
Right.
in the hotel, and that's exactly what happened. In swooped our security, in came Metro, right there with no embarrassment to we weren't embarrassed. We wanted it to be visual.
Yeah.
Cuffed and walked out the door, put in the squad car, and gone in front of everybody. Obvious reason.
So, but the reason was he was being obvious, and if he wasn't, he would have been okay.
Well, how stupid can he be? Everybody knows we have cameras, and if we didn't have cameras, we'd have the live guys with binoculars. But that progressed. That was back in the day when
Yeah.
I was at the Mint Hotel.
So the way the mob worked, you know, we could look at Jubilation, which was the most famous of all the nightclubs, Paul Anka's Jubilation, where Lefty Rosenthal and Tony Spilotro hung out.
They hung out. They had dinner there all the time.
But was that true with the other nightclubs as well through time?
They weren't at the other nightclubs because they had a piece of that one.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said once before, I think we talked about it. They were at a place called either there at the Jubilation or the Tower of Pizza, which was Spilaccio's pizza joint that is now where that debunked Ferris wheel never got built, across from Mandalay Bay.
Over by the boardwalk.
Well, yeah, over by the boardwalk. We got to take another break. This is a lot of fun. We're going to come back and ask me something embarrassing. We'll be right back with more of Vegas Pulse, stories from the back of the house, with me, Ron Garrett, and our guest, Doug Jablin, right after this. And we're back on Vegas Pulse, stories from the back of the house, We're talking stories with Doug Jablin, back of the house, front of the house, side of the house, in the parking lot. Long as we had a gaming license, the whole plot of land we were on qualified for gaming. I say that because there was one time in Laughlin when I was the general manager of Gold River, which became River Palms, which today it's called the Lakeside Inn or something. It's a Dottie's now. But we had the biker weekend every week, every April. The bikers didn't want to stay in a hotel. So I put slot machines in the parking lot. Got me a lot of trouble. But you can't do that. Yes, you can. You have a gaming license. It's the whole property, not just the building. So I put slot machines in tents in the parking lot and places for those guys to park their bikes outside. And that gave me a lot of business, and the rest of the town got a little ticked off at me because they didn't think about it. But that's just a side story.
So, in relation to the disco era and you being a party boy, we haven't really gotten into that side of things, that you were driving really fancy cars and, you know, you're partying all night long to collect your money at the end of the night.
All night long.
What was that like?
It was very tiring. Also, you had to have a lot of resilience because I had a job. Now, we had an ad agency in those days, in the 70s. Tom Letizia, my partner, and I. Tom would work 9 to 5, 9 a.m., 5 p.m., like most people. Somebody had to be there. But since we had 7 nightclubs that we were the ad guys for, my shift was 9 to 5, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. But there were times that I had to do a radio show on the weekends at 6 a.m. So there was plenty of times where I didn't go to sleep. I didn't go home. I was out partying, yeah, I was, and collecting, but mostly it was client service. You know, we're out there trying to keep the account, and we're trying to get paid. But that's a good excuse, by the way, to call it client service, because that's what we were doing, and we had a terrific time doing that. It was a lot of fun.
But what was it like? Just, you know, that
what was it like?
Being embedded in that era, the way you were, you know, were you into the music? Did you like to dance?
No, I didn't like to dance. I would do one dance and sit down because all the ladies wanted to dance, and I would go for one. But no, I didn't like to dance. The reason why I didn't like to dance, I'm wearing a 3-piece suit. I got stiff starched collars, a tie, and it's 105 degrees outside. I don't want to sweat. I don't want to ruin my suit. But I had a suit for every day, and because at one time one of my clients was a clothing store, so I would trade out for suits. And I had a new suit every night. And it was a lot of fun, but I didn't want to get sweaty, so I didn't want to dance. But most of the time it was just socializing and trying to have a good time. And then sometimes you'd pick up the stragglers at 5 in the morning who didn't find a guy that night, and they're staggering out the front door, and I just happened to be there. And you want to watch me do a radio show? You know.
So the question I have related to the mob is, people are still scared of the mob to this day, that they don't want to say anything that could incriminate themselves or, you know, anyone else. How prevalent is the mob today to be that scared?
They shouldn't be scared. It's nothing like it was. Where is the mob today? Well, they made a lot of money. It was 50 years ago, so there's 2 generations since then. The second generation since then is running the businesses here in town. The grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the mobsters who started some of these liquor distributing companies, the food distributing companies, the linen, the lettuce guy, the meat, all that back in those days was all mob controlled. Today, it's legit. It's 100% legit. However, it's been passed down. So the current generation are straight. It's legitimate. They're doing real business. But the roots are back in those days. And it's just one generation after the other. Italian mob guys always took care of their families. Always. And if one of the guys went to jail, the other mob guys would take care of that person's family. That's the way it worked in those days. Not bad.
Are we good for another question?
We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to come back with one more question, okay?
Okay.
You're watching Vegas Pulse, stories from back of the house. It's my turn to tell all these stories. Now, remember, I said to you, there is some exaggeration in these stories. Make it funny. Make it nicer. Make it more interesting. We'll be right back with Doug Jablin. We're talking with Doug Jablin. He's a writer, a filmmaker, a documentary producer, and he's here to talk to me to find out some of the dirt that took place back in the 70s, the 80s when I came to town, and the 90s, and the 2s, whatever you want, Doug.
So yeah, let's jump forward to the 80s, and the big clubs were Botany's, Tramps, Mr. G's, TGI Fridays. And what was that like, that shift?
Well, TGI Fridays was more restaurant than nightclub. I've been to Botany's a couple of times. The radio station that I was associated with then, KLUC, and the general manager there, his name was Keith Gerst. He had a big client with Botany's. They spent a lot of money in that station, so we were comped. So we went there, because I did business with those stations in my ad agency, even the one I had in Reno. So we went there a few times, but not often. Mostly, I'd hang out down the street at TGI Fridays because it would get something to eat, but it became a social place, and that became the spot. Mr. G's was another one. There was a place called, oh my goodness, Good Time Charlie's, which was on Maryland Parkway. It's now it's a round black building. Now it's a eye doctor or lawyers, but it was called Good Time Charlie's. It was unique. It was in a circle. That was another one of our hangouts.
Why, apart from it being a circle, why was it unique? Was it a nightclub?
It wasn't a nightclub. It was a lunch club, along with Cafe Michelle, which was on. You've heard of that one, right?
Yeah,
Cafe
that was on
Michelle.
Flamingo.
That was another Spalaccio deal over there. I don't think he owned a piece of it, but he was having lunch there a lot, along with my mentor, Mr. Mel Larson. And he had his own table there. We're running out of time. You have a final
Too bad.
question you'd like to?
There's so many questions I have.
We'll have to bring you back again.
I guess so. It's really tough to, have only a few minutes to be able to talk, and you've got so much to say.
Well, I got 54 years to say here. That's pretty much.
But going back to Spilotro owning Cafe Michelle, how long?
No, he didn't own a piece. He hung out there. He didn't own it.
Okay.
He
So
hung
he
out
just
there.
had friends.
We always stayed outside. The weather was nice here, of course, most of the time. And he had his own table, and so did all the executives and the cops and the judges and all the crooks are there. They're all in the same place. Hotel executives, casino executives, the sheriff, the cops, the lawyers, the district attorney, Spilaccio, Rosenthal. We're all in the same room.
Nobody cared.
Nobody cared.
Well, the fact that Lefty
Vegas in
Rosenthal
the
had
70s.
a TV show.
That's right. That was amazing. I was there in the audience on the first show that he did with Frankie Avalon, which they show on. I'm not sure it was Frankie Avalon. Yes, it was.
It was?
They show it on Casino, and they
It
bring
wasn't
in.
Paul Anka.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
No, it was Frankie Avalon. He actually did that. I think Paul Anka appeared on it too,
Yeah.
because it was Paul Anka's jubilation.
Right.
He was the lead. We got to wrap it up. I'm sure we're a little bit over. There is so much to talk about, so we're going to bring you back again
Okay.
in a couple of weeks. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Everybody, thank you so much for watching Vegas Pulse, stories from back of the house. And I've got a few. Next week, I'll have another great guest on, and in just a couple of weeks, we'll bring Doug back so he can dig into my past a little further and see how much trouble he can get me in. Thank you all for watching. I'm Ron Garrett, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.